Hey everybody, excuse me. Welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Thursday the 18th of September. Yesterday I was talking about the church gathered and scattered. I think it was yesterday anyway. Today I'd like to pick up from the same essay by John Bowen, Why Mission, Why Now, Why Here? In which in this part he's talking about social justice. Okay. He says social justice makes strange bedfellows. One Baptist pastor I know puts it this way, that charity is meeting someone's need. Social justice is dealing with the things that created the need in the first place. Dom Helder Camero, 1909 to 1999, a Roman Catholic archbishop in Brazil, once said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist." The universality of this concern across the Church, from Baptist to Roman Catholic, speaks of its importance. Yet at the same time, this focus too can become imbalanced, though for the best of motives. The need to forge alliances with other organizations, not necessarily Christian, can lead to a watering down of Christian distinctiveness. The determination to engage in societal transformation can mean an avoidance of even low-key relational forms of evangelism. Likewise, the desire to do good can mean that churches move straight to action without taking time to building trusting relationships with those seeking justice. And the need for a quick and flexible response to emerging justice issues can lead to a fragmentation of action. I think this is really important to hang on to because we are living, especially right now, I think we are living in a world where there is a lot of focus, a lot of attention on the poor and on those who have been shoved to the margins and those who are being shoved right off the map, off the margins. And at the same time, there is also pushback for those who are speaking up for them. There's this idea that, as he said, if you feed the poor, you're a saint. If you ask, what is it that's caused them to be poor, you're a communist. And I think, especially right now in Canada, in North America, that has become a really, really big hot button issue. Not for the reasons that John Bowen is speaking of, but for other things that are happening. But at the end of the day, regardless of why they're happening, this is a thing. When we are the church, yesterday I talked about the gathered church. When we are the gathered church, we often think about those ways that we can then feed the poor. How many churches have food banks or encourage their congregations to bring in food that they then take to the food bank to feed the poor? How many times do we, as the gathered church, do the footwork for that kind of thing? But then when we start to ask the question, we begin the work of being scattered church by taking that food we've gathered and moving it out, or even start opening up a food bank or something like that. But then in scattered church mode, we start to do like recognizing that this in scattered church is where we are called to ask the question, why is this happening? What is it about our society, our world, our community that we have people who are homeless, who are hungry, who are in need of social justice and things like this? What does that mean? Well, how far do we get as gathered church when we start asking those questions? How comfortable is your priest when you start saying we should do something about asking those questions? How often do we as church actually acknowledge that maybe we have a role to play in that? And I think that's very important because that isn't just something I think where I live in Brandon and in Manitoba, and we are blessed with both a community college and a university. And quite often, I fall into the trap of thinking, well, especially since I don't have a church of my own. I work at the cathedral, but that is not my church. Well, it is, but it is a place where my office is, but it's not where I am every week. I don't have a place that I am every week to get to know the people and do that work. But I think to myself, we should be doing something about this. We should be finding out not only how to feed people, but find out why they're hungry, what is happening in our world. And then, you ask that question. Well, and I fall in this trap too, as I just said, of saying, well, we have university students. They're the fired up ones. The college students, these young people, they're the go-get-ems. They're the ones who are, the real, the, the protesters. They're the ones who feel the desire to go out and change the world. The question is, why would the church slough that off to the young people who aren't in the church? Why is it that we as Christians seem to think, as gathered church, that we should be sharing, like not just sharing, but but saying, okay, we'll grab the food, we'll fill the food banks for you, but somebody else has got to do the legwork and the work of figuring out why food banks are required and then fixing the problem. We'll feed them, we'll fill them, but you do the work. No, no, that is not how it's called to work. The church should be at the forefront, doing both. It should be both and. We should be filling those food banks up to full and overflowing, but we should also then be hitting the streets, asking the questions, doing the work, pushing our politicians to say what is wrong with the system that people need the food banks. In the past, it has been the churches, at least in Canada, who worked hard to make sure we had homes for children, we had places for women to go who were pregnant and needed to give birth. We had orphanages, we had hospitals, we had places where food banks and things like that, daycare. These things often over the past 150 years emerged from the church. The church responding to the needs of the community around them. And then somehow in the 30s and 40s, I think, in the 50s and 60s, thanks to Tommy Douglas and lots of people in Canada, the government started recognizing that that was part of their purview, that they needed to do that. And then the church seems to have just sort of said, okay, well, somebody else is going to do it. We're not going to have to. But we're now in a world where the governments are starting to say, no, it's not our job. If you are hungry, get a job. If you don't have a job, well, then you're lazy. If you don't have a house to live in, well, then you must have done something wrong. The church should be that place where it says, if you have no place to live, and maybe you did do something wrong, then we'll help you find a place to live. We'll give you some shelter. We'll find you a safe place to be. And then as you find a new place to be, we'll help you figure out what it is that happened. Did you actually do something to lose your house? Was it a choice you made? And if so, then how can we help you to make different choices? But in some cases, it isn't. It's the choice of a bank calling in a loan for a person who lost their job because their employer moved the plant to a different country. There are lots of reasons why people end up in the situations they are in. And the church should be coming back and saying, we need to be both saints and communists. At the end of the day, we really should. To be called a communist because you're asking the question, how did this happen and how can we fix it? That should be nothing to be ashamed of. That should be nothing to be ashamed of. If someone calls me a communist or a socialist because I want all of God's children to be safe and healthy and secure and fed, then bring it on. I'll wear that with a capital C, because I can also wear with a capital C the word Christian. And really, aren't those two things interrelated? We are indeed called to be the church gathered and scattered. And in the gathering, we feed the people, we fill those food banks. In the scattering, we figure out what we can do to make sure the food banks are no longer needed. But it is indeed ours. It is indeed ours to do. Let me know what you think. Give me some ideas. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I can take it. But let's have a conversation. Let's not sit back and think that this isn't our problem. Because if we are a C, capital C, Christian, then it absolutely is our problem. Have a great day. God bless. And I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel.